You're very welcome to a new part of the Ready4Raiding strategy guide. In the next few minutes, we will explain a few abilities. To make it easier, we're showing them with an identification tag with 3 different symbols, which are supposed to show you if these are suitable for your player type or not. Now to the actual center of attention, the big dragon Alysrazor. The mean fire lord, Ready4Raiding's, lit her on fire and she's burning since. To put out the fire, she's flying around in circles, high up in the air. We keep waiting in the meantime until she's all tired out from flying and falls down. As soon as that happens, there are a few helpers who try to light her up again, but if we beat her to death first, that won't happen at all. How this works, we will show you here. First of all, the basics of this fight. As you can read in the dungeon journal, there are 4 phases in this fight. But the main phase is the first one, all the others only take a few seconds. During the first phase, Alysrazor flies across the plane 3 times. And you shouldn't stand in her fly path, ideally. Every time she flies along there, she loses 20 or 25 feathers, which you can pick up and which give you a speed buff. The speed buff enables you to move faster and to cast spells while doing so. There is a new user interface element, which you can see at the bottom here, the 3 feathers. They are black at the moment because we didn't pick one up yet. Every time you pick one of those feathers up, the symbol gets filled. 3 is the maximum, with which you get catapulted into the air to attack Alysrazor. As the main focus lies on the action on the ground, and particularly on all the ads that come flying all the time, you should consider how many DPS you can spare and send up in the air. In our case, that's 3. I hope you can manage similarly well, because to be honest, in this, our first kill, we were very close to the enrage timer, and maybe it makes more sense to send a few more up in the air. But, first rule, kill all ads that appear in the first phase. To have some mobs left in the second phase will most likely kill you. The now following second phase is only a few seconds long. There are a few tornadoes which blow over the plane in circles. Avoid those and try to survive. In the third phase, which also only lasts for 20 or 30 seconds, you have the first real chance to attack Alysrazor and cause her severe damage. Once she gets herself back together a bit, phase 4 kicks in. In that phase, Alysrazor has to be tanked. Phase 4 lasts as long as it takes Alysrazor to get from 50 energy back up to 100. Once she is recharged entirely, she takes off again and phase 1 starts again. Theoretically, you can do this twice. After that, the enrage timer of Alysrazor starts and you wouldn't survive a complete third run so. But as Alysrazor only attacks you directly in phase 4, it is no big deal if you get to the enrage timer, because you would only die if phase 4 starts for the 3rd time, as she will attack then. That was all in regard to the fight basics, which leads me now to the group composition. We used 2 tanks for this fight, which take care of the hatchlings in the first phase and take care of Alysrazor later. Additionally, we have 7 healers, 7 mainly because there's a lot of damage in phase 4, and also the damage isn't very low in this first phase either. And the rest are DPS. It's important that they have counterspells. Why that is exactly, I will tell you later. Now, the mentioned second phase kicks in which you shouldn't stand in the middle, as the fiery vortex appears there, which causes quite some damage. The fiery tornadoes also appear out of this vortex, which you have to avoid. There are 2 possibilities to do that. You can find a spot which doesn't get crossed by the tornadoes directly, and then you move between 2 channels, just like our shadow is doing it here. As an alternative technique, you can pick out one tornado and run after it. With the speed buff of the feathers, it shouldn't be a problem to keep up. And then you don't have to avoid the tornadoes anymore. This is now the 3rd phase. All DPS and healers should attack Alysrazor, who is lying on the ground, not moving. The 2 tanks, though, have to take care of the claw shapers, who landed outside. Take care in this case doesn't mean to tank, but to stun them. If they don't get stunned, they recharge Alysrazor's energy much quicker, and then the phase would only be half as long as it is now here with us. As this is your main damage phase, the CC is very important. In this phase we cuddle a bit, as there is quite some group damage due to the blazing buffet. Also, Alysrazor gets tanked away from the group, and the tanks have to swap during that. The blazing claws that Alysrazor is using are leaving a stackable dot on the tanks, so it would be good if you could taunt after 5 or 6 stacks. This phase always ends with Alysrazor kicking you away, like you just saw here. And then phase 1 starts again. The feather or speed buff you will lose near the end of the second phase, which means you have to start from scratch and collect new feathers. Now, the details of phase 1. The first mob that comes flying onto the plane is the blazing Talon Initiate, who creates the moving fireballs which fly across the ground. They're not particularly important, as you can avoid them easily thanks to the feather buff. But that's not all, they also make a so-called Feroblast. If they manage to finish that spell, a randomly chosen player suffers fire damage and gets a dot. It also buffs the cast speed of the blazing Talon Initiate, so he can send the stupid fireballs your way much quicker. You have to prevent this from happening and use 2 players to interrupt the blazing Talon Initiates. Should a single Feroblast get through, you can at least dispel the dot that you get through that. Of the blazing Talon Initiate, there are always 2 appearing, so 1 on each side of the plane, approximately at the same time. That's why we spread out our DPS and healer evenly on both sides, and they try to stay in their half all the time. There's the advantage that they won't run out of the healer's reach and therefore have quite a good chance to survive. If you as a DPS don't have to take care of the blazing Talon Initiates, you can attack the voracious hatchlings who crawl across the ground here. They hatch out of eggs which get dropped at the beginning of each phase. They show some chick-like behavior and always imprint the player nearest to them when they hatch. Which means if a tank stands beside an egg, the hatchling would follow only the tank until it dies at some stage. The tank gets some kind of small buff which enables him to cause 1,000 times more damage on the hatchlings and actually cause some severe damage on them. Nevertheless, the DPS have to help them. The actual goal for the tanks and the hatchlings is though to kill these worms, who spit fire across the plane all the time. As they have no health bar, they cannot be advised. But you can destroy them easily by pulling a hatchling over them. That has to be timed well by the tanks, as there are only 4 worms per side. The hatchlings have a saturation level. The better they are fed, the less damage they cause. Or, in other words, if they're hungry, they cause severe damage. So the tanks have to wait a while before they pull a hatchling over the next worm. Until the end of this phase, you should have destroyed all the worms, and only then should you kill the last hatchling. Ideally, it ends like we are showing it here, when phase 2 kicks in that very moment. On each side of the plane, there's a little niche, and you might think you could run in there quickly. But Blizzard built in some harsh winds, which leads to you being hit by those when you run out over the 4th tornado path. You can get severely harmed. It really is like alive one moment, dead the next. Try not to go past the 4th path and stay relatively close to the center. Here you see the 3rd phase again, during which the healers should DPS as well. You don't have to worry about the mana here at all, because you regenerate mana by attacking Alysrazor. And also, you cause a lot more damage on Alysrazor when she's lifeless like this. It is helpful to use Time Warp, Heroism or Bloodlust, and also drink some Volcanic Potion or similar. Alysrazor should be nearly dead by now and actually die towards the end of the 4th phase, which is running right now. During this phase, there is constantly a dot ticking on the raid, which can cause some serious damage, so you should gather together and trigger some defensive cooldowns, like us here, with using the power word Barrier. Towards the end of this phase, there's an explosion, which could inflict damage too, so it's very important that you are well protected. Now, I'm nearly at the end of my explanations. As I said, you should have Alysrazor killed by now. We didn't manage yet, as you can see. We will keep playing it for a bit more until we get to phase 3 again. But I don't want to be bugging you with that, so I fast forward a bit here. One thing I would still like to explain: if you're up in the air, you have to play some kind of Star Fox game, which means that if you want to extend your flight buff, you have to fly some kind of circle, which you could see during phase 2, but on the ground. In the air, they always appear behind Alysrazor, and if you want to stay there, you should pass them ideally. That was all now. I must admit, the fight got a good bit more difficult in comparison to the PTR version. The DPS requirements got a bit higher. Before you try this one, you should probably go and kill Lord Rhyolith, Shanox and Bethtilak, and Ballarok is also a bit easier, I think. As always, you can find a detailed guide to this fight on Ready4Raiding.com. That was it for today. See you in the next guide.